Today I want to share the story of a woman whose life was shattered by betrayal, beaten, abandoned, and left to die by the man she was forced to marry. But destiny had other plans. The one who found her in her darkest hour was her first love. The Apache warrior she thought she'd lost forever. This is a story of heartbreak, survival, and a love so strong that not even time or tragedy could destroy it. If this story touches your heart, please help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more people can experience this journey of hope and love. The desert never lied. Its wind carried the truth, dry, bitter, and ancient, across miles of cracked earth and sleeping stone. It whispered over the bones of forgotten men and the dreams of those still foolish enough to love. That morning, the horizon burned with copper light as the sun rose behind the mesas. A lone rider moved through the heat shimmer, his horse's hooves soft against the hardened ground. His name was Rain Nashoba, an Apache warrior who had long stopped calling any place home. He rode as though time itself had let him go. Dust clung to his coat, his braid, his silence. The rifle slung across his back was worn smooth by years, like a story retold too many times. He wasn't searching for anything, not fortune, not trouble. He'd learned that both found a man soon enough without invitation, but fate has a way of waiting for the right wind. Near the skeleton of a half-buried fence, Rain caught sight of something that didn't belong, a flicker of color against the pale sand. He reined in his mare, narrowing his eyes. It looked like a torn cloth, maybe a blanket tossed by a passing storm. Yet something in his gut told him otherwise. He dismounted, boots crunching softly. The air felt heavier now, the way it does before a bad dream takes hold. He stepped closer. It wasn't a blanket. It was a woman. She was tied to the fence post, her hands raw and bound behind her back. Her dress was in tatters, the fabric stiff with dirt and blood. Flies buzzed around her, and her lips were cracked open in a breath that barely existed. A blindfold, once white, covered her eyes. Rain's throat tightened. Whoever she was, someone had meant her to die here. He dropped to his knees beside her, the leather of his gloves brushing against her shoulder. "Easy," he murmured, voice low and steady. He reached for his knife and began sawing at the sun-baked rope. It took longer than he wanted. The fibers fought him like stubborn ghosts. When the last strand snapped, the woman collapsed forward into his arms. Her head lolled against his chest, her hair falling loose, matted with dust and blood. Then he saw her face. For a moment, the world went still. The wind, the sun, even the distant cry of the hawk above. His breath caught like a man struck in the chest. Beneath the bruises, beneath the ruin, he knew her, Evelyn. He whispered. The name trembled out of him like a prayer he'd buried years ago. Her lashes fluttered, her lips moved, and she breathed his name back. Rain. The desert wind carried it away, soft as a vow returned from the dead. Rain held her for a long time, unsure if the trembling in his arms belonged to her or to himself. The desert wind moved around them like a living thing, whispering over the dry earth, stirring the edge of her torn dress. "Stay with me," he said quietly, but her head only fell against his chest, her breath shallow and uneven. He lifted her, light as a shadow, and carried her to his horse. The mare shied at first, sensing blood, but a soft word from Rain calmed her. He settled the woman across the saddle, wrapping her in the blanket from his pack. Her skin was hot beneath the dust, fever, dehydration. But she was alive, and that was more than he'd expected to find in this unforgiving land. As he mounted behind her, she stirred faintly. Her fingers brushed his coat. "Rain!" She breathed again, barely a sound, just a ghost of a word. The name cut through him sharper than any blade. He remembered that voice, soft, stubborn, full of laughter once. 3 years ago, it had called his name beneath the moonlight by the riverbank, and then, without warning, it had vanished. She had vanished, no word, no trace. Now she was here, broken, bound, and left for dead. He rode east, toward the canyons where few dared follow. The trail wound through dry gullies and narrow passes, the kind known only to men who lived more by instinct than map. The sun climbed higher, pressing heat into their backs, but Rain didn't slow. When at last the walls of red stone rose around him, He turned his horse toward a hidden cleft in the rock, a place he'd built with his own hands long ago, when the world had first turned cold. Inside, the air was cool and damp with the scent of stone and sage. A trickle of spring water gleamed near the wall. He laid her down gently on a woven mat of deerskin and furs. Her breathing was uneven, her lips dry. He took water in his hands and let it touch her mouth. Slowly she swallowed. A small sound escaped her throat, half pain, half life. When he untied the blindfold, he saw the bruises circling her eyes, the cracked skin at her temple. She looked like someone who had been through hell, and somehow walked back out. Her eyes opened, dazed and flickering with confusion. "Where am I?" "Safe," Rain answered. She blinked at him, her gaze struggling to focus. Then recognition lit faintly in the blue of her eyes. "It really is you," she whispered. He felt the words like a pulse beneath his ribs. "It's me." A tear slipped down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of disbelief. "I thought you were a dream," she said softly. Rain looked away, because he wasn't sure dreams like theirs ever truly ended. Outside, the wind swept across the canyon mouth, and for the first time in years, it sounded less like mourning and more like promise. The fire crackled softly in the hollow of the canyon, throwing warm light against the stone walls. Shadows swayed like quiet ghosts across the ground. Rain sat near the flames, grinding dried herbs between his palms, the scent of sage and wild mint filling the air. Behind him, Evelyn stirred beneath the blanket. Her breathing had steadied since dawn, though her skin still carried the faint flush of fever. Rain poured the herbs into a small pot of water and set it beside the fire. He wasn't a healer, but he'd learned enough from the old ones to know how to pull pain out of a body without breaking it further. When he turned back, she was watching him. Her eyes, tired but alive, followed the steady rhythm of his hands. "You still move the same," she whispered. Rain looked up, surprised. "The same?" "Careful," she said faintly. "Like every motion matters." He didn't answer right away. "Out here it does." For a while, silence filled the canyon, the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. Then she asked the question he'd known was coming. "How did you find me?" "I didn't," Rain said, voice low. "You found me. Or maybe the desert did. Sometimes it brings back what the world tries to bury." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "They left me to die," he met her gaze. "Who?" Evelyn hesitated, her fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. "The man I was forced to marry," she said finally, the words brittle with pain. "He said it was justice, that I brought shame, that I deserved to be forgotten." Rain's jaw tightened, the firelight catching the scar across his cheek. "You didn't deserve this," she let out a shaky breath. "You don't understand. I thought I was saving you, Rain. I thought if I married him, my father would let you live." He turned his head sharply. "Your father?" She nodded weakly. "He found your letters. He said you were a savage pretending to be a man. He said if I didn't end it, he'd see you hunted down." For a long time, neither spoke. Only the wind filled the space between them. Rain stared into the fire, its flames reflected in his dark eyes. "You could have told me," he said finally. "I tried," she whispered. "I sent a message through Simon, our old servant. But they caught him. After that, I was a prisoner in my own home." Rain's breath came heavy through his nose. Years of silence, of thinking she'd betrayed him, collapsed into dust. The hurt didn't vanish, but it shifted, like a wound finally allowed to heal. He reached for the pot, poured a little of the warm tea into a tin cup, and handed it to her. "Drink," he said softly. "You're safe now." Evelyn took the cup in both trembling hands. "Safe," she repeated as if testing the word on her tongue. Then, after a pause, she looked up at him. "You never stopped caring, did you?" Rain didn't smile, but something in his eyes softened. "No," he said quietly, "and I never will." Outside, the stars shimmered over the canyon, old and patient. The night carried their light across the desert, across the space where love had once died, and now, against all odds, had begun to breathe again. Morning came soft and gold through the canyon mouth, brushing light over the sandstone walls. The desert was quiet, holding its breath in that brief moment before the heat began to rise. Evelyn sat near the spring, her reflection rippling in the shallow water. She cupped a handful, letting it run through her fingers. The cool touch reminded her that she was alive, something she hadn't truly believed when Rain found her. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of Rain's boots on stone. "You should rest," he said, his voice steady but gentle. She turned slightly. "I've done enough resting. I need to remember how to live again." He stopped a few paces away, watching her. "You will. Just don't rush it." Evelyn smiled faintly, though her eyes held a sadness deeper than words. "The world rushed me long before you found me." Rain knelt by the spring, filling a canteen. He didn't press her to speak, but she continued anyway, her voice quiet. "Do you know what the sheriff called me when I arrived in Santa Fe? Mrs. Abernathy. I hated that name. It sounded like chains." Rain looked at her then, really looked, at the way her shoulders tensed as she said it, the way her hands trembled ever so slightly. "Then stop wearing it," he said simply, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "A name's only a prison if you keep carrying it. Leave it in the dust with the rest of what they did to you." Evelyn was silent. The words hit something deep, something she hadn't realized was waiting to be freed. After a long pause, she said, "My mother used to call me Eve when I was little. She said it meant life. It was my real name before everything changed." Rain nodded once. "Then that's who you are, Eve," she breathed out slowly, as if exhaling years of fear. "Eve," she repeated, testing it like a secret melody she'd forgotten. For the first time in a long while, the sound didn't hurt. The wind picked up, stirring her hair, carrying the scent of sage and sand. She closed her eyes, letting it touch her face. In that moment, she didn't feel like the broken woman who had been left for dead. She felt like someone being reborn. When she opened her eyes again, Rain was still watching her. "What is it?" she asked softly. He gave a faint smile, rare and quiet. "Just remembering the girl who used to dance barefoot by the river. You looked like her for a moment." Eve's heart ached with the memory, but this time it wasn't pain alone. "Maybe she's still in there somewhere," she whispered. "She is," he said, "and she's stronger than before." The sun rose higher, lighting the canyon in a wash of amber and gold. Eve stood, her reflection sharp now in the spring's surface, not the wife of a cruel man, not a ghost from the past, but a woman learning how to carry her name again. By the third day, color had returned to Eve's cheeks. The bruises, though still tender, had begun to fade. She could move without wincing, speak without her voice shaking, and for the first time since the desert tried to claim her, she woke to the sound of birds, not fear. Rain had risen before dawn. She could hear the soft rhythm of his axe splitting mesquite wood near the canyon mouth. The sound was steady, sure, like the beat of a heart that refused to quit. When she stepped outside the shelter, morning light bathed the rocks in rose and gold. Rain looked up briefly, his face glistening with sweat. "You shouldn't be walking far yet," he said, not unkindly. "I'm not made of glass," Eve replied, her lips curving. He paused mid-swing, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Didn't say you were. Just don't want to have to carry you again." She tilted her head. "You didn't seem to mind it then." He said nothing, just went back to splitting wood. But she saw the faint flush rise beneath the sun-darkened skin of his jaw. They worked quietly together for a while, he stacking, she gathering fallen branches. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, filled with unspoken things, forgiveness, old ache, the beginning of something fragile but real. Later, as the day warmed, they shared bread and jerky near the spring. The canyon air shimmered with heat, but the water ran cool beside them. Eve traced the rim of her tin cup, her gaze distant. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. Rain chewed thoughtfully before answering. "Sometimes, but out there, the world's still wearing the same mask. Greed, hate, and men who think they own the earth. Here at least it's honest." Eve nodded slowly. "Maybe honesty's all I need for now." But as she said it, her eyes caught something on the horizon, a thin ribbon of smoke curling into the sky far beyond the canyon rim. She frowned. "Rain, do you see that?" He turned, followed her gaze, and his expression hardened. The smoke wasn't from a campfire. It was too thick, too steady. "That's a signal," he said under his breath. Eve's stomach tightened. "Signal?" "Riders," Rain replied, standing. "Could be soldiers. Could be bounty men. Either way, they're too close." Her pulse quickened. "They're looking for me, maybe," he said. "Or maybe for me. Either way, we'll be ready." He moved toward the back of the canyon, checking his rifle, his movements calm and deliberate. The same man who had once been her protector and her heartbreak now stood as her shield again. Eve rose, wrapping her shawl tight. "I won't run this time," she said quietly. Rain looked back at her, the faintest flicker of pride in his eyes. "Didn't figure you would." Far above them, the plume of smoke drifted east with the wind, a warning written across the endless sky. The past was on its way, and this time they would face it together. The day stretched long and tense beneath the burning sun. By noon, the air above the canyon wavered like glass, carrying the faint echo of hoofbeats through the distance. Rain heard it first. That steady rhythm of pursuit, too organized to be wanderers. He crouched on a ledge overlooking the valley, scanning the far ridge through a spyglass. 5 riders, armed, moving slow but certain, like wolves who already knew where the trail would end. He lowered the glass, jaw tightening. "They're coming this way," he murmured. Eve stood below, her hands clasped around a water canteen she no longer remembered holding. "Can they find us here?" "Not unless they know what to look for," Rain replied. "But smoke carries far. They'll see where we've burned wood." She looked toward the campfire pit, the faint curl of ash still whispering into the sky. "Then they'll find me." Rain turned to her, his gaze steady. "They'll have to go through me first." Eve's heart twisted at the calm in his voice. He spoke like a man long accustomed to danger, like someone who had already made peace with dying if it came to that. "I don't want anyone dying for me again," she said, her voice breaking slightly. He gave a faint smile, tired but warm. "Then stay alive. That'll be enough." By nightfall, the horizon glowed red with sunset. The riders hadn't yet reached the canyon mouth, but their campfires flickered faintly in the distance. The desert carried the scent of them, tobacco, gun oil, horses. Eve couldn't sleep. She sat beside Rain near the dying embers of their fire, her hands folded in her lap. "Who do you think they are?" she asked. "Could be bounty men," he said. "Could be Abernathy's hired guns." The sound of that name made her flinch. If it's him? If he survived? Rain looked into the flames. Then it's time he learned that the desert doesn't take kindly to cruelty. She watched him. The way the firelight painted his face, carved by hardship, but softened now by something gentler. He had every reason to turn away, to let her face her demons alone. Yet here he was, building a wall between her and every shadow that dared reach her. "Rain," she said softly, "why are you still protecting me after everything that happened?" He didn't answer right away. Then finally he said, "Because I never stopped caring. And because you deserve a life that isn't built on fear." Eve felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're Eve," he said quietly. Not his wife. Not his victim, just Eve. The words wrapped around her like a promise. For the first time, she didn't feel like someone running from the past. She felt like someone standing her ground. Above them, the stars broke open across the sky, fierce and endless. And somewhere beyond the dark ridges, the riders kept coming, their torches flickering like angry hearts. But this time, Eve wasn't afraid. The dawn came restless. Clouds rolled in from the south, heavy and gray, their bellies swollen with the promise of a rare desert storm. The air itself seemed to tremble, as if the earth knew what was coming. Rain stood at the canyon's edge, scanning the horizon. Dust rose in the distance, a swirling ghost against the pale light. The riders were close now. He could count 4, maybe 5, though it was hard to tell where the wind ended and men began. Behind him, Eve gathered what few supplies they had, a canteen, a pouch of dried herbs, and the small knife Rain had given her. Her fingers shook as she tightened the strap, but her eyes were steady. "They're here, aren't they?" she asked. Rain nodded once. You'll hear them before you see them. Horses don't move quiet on this kind of ground, Eve swallowed hard. If it's Abernathy, then you'll let me handle it, Rain said. His tone was calm, but the storm in his chest told another story. No, she said firmly, straightening. This time I face what I ran from. He looked at her, really looked. And for a heartbeat, he saw the same fire that had once drawn him to her under the summer moon. She wasn't the frightened girl from years ago. The desert had burned away her weakness and left only strength. Thunder rolled low and far away, echoing through the canyon walls. They waited. Minutes stretched thin as thread until the first rider appeared, a tall man in a dark coat, hat pulled low, pistol at his hip. 4 others followed. Their horses were weary, but their eyes sharp. Stay back, Rain murmured, stepping forward. His rifle rested across his arm, but his stance was that of a man who would fight even with bare hands if he had to. The lead rider halted a few paces away. Well, I'll be damned, he drawled. Didn't think we'd find her this far out. Eve's breath caught. The voice was unmistakable. The years had deepened it, but it still carried that same poisonous charm. Henry, she said softly. The man lifted his head, and a cruel smile cut across his face. You remember me? That's sweet. His gaze flicked to Rain. And this must be your savior. The Indian you used to sneak off to meet by the river. I should have known, Rain said nothing. His silence was more dangerous than any threat. Henry dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the dust. You belong to me, Evelyn. You always did. And now that I've found you, Eve took a step forward, her voice steady as stone. My name isn't Evelyn anymore. He stopped. What did you say? She lifted her chin. My name is Eve. Lightning split the sky above them. Thunder roaring through the canyon like an answer from the heavens. And in that flash of light, Rain saw something in her eyes. Not fear. Not pain, but defiance. Whatever happened next. She wasn't running anymore. The storm hit like the wrath of the desert itself. Rain fell in sheets, whipping sand into their faces, turning the canyon floor into a slick, treacherous mess. Thunder rolled like the roar of 1,000 drums, echoing off the cliffs and drowning out the sound of hooves. Henry's grin faltered as he struggled to keep his footing. The riders behind him cursed and shouted, their voices lost in the roar of the elements. Rain moved silently, like a shadow that belonged to the storm. His eyes never left Eve. Now, he shouted. Eve didn't hesitate. She seized a moment when Henry slipped in the mud, and she swung her knife, slicing the strap of his coat. He stumbled, caught by Rain's steady hand as he lunged forward. The 2 men grappled, rain soaking them to the bone, their struggle illuminated by jagged streaks of lightning. Eve felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in years, pure, unshakable power. Fear still whispered at the edges of her mind, but it no longer controlled her. She was no one's shadow, no one's prisoner. She was herself, Eve, and she would fight for it. She kicked at another rider who tried to grab her, sending him sprawling into the mud. The remaining 2 hesitated, unsure if they should retreat or press forward. Rain didn't give them time. With a swift, precise motion, he knocked one from his horse, leaving the last rider paralyzed with indecision. Henry twisted beneath Rain's grip, his face contorted with rage. You'll regret this. You already have, Eve said, her voice steady and cutting through the storm. She grabbed a loose rock and slammed it into the ground between them. I am not afraid anymore. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating her face with a brilliance that seemed almost otherworldly. In that moment something shifted. The fear that had haunted her for years, the shadows of her past crumbled and fell away. She felt lighter, freer, as if the storm itself had washed away the chains Henry had wrapped around her heart. Henry's eyes flicked to Rain and then back to Eve. Rage and disbelief warred in his expression. For the first time he realized that she was untouchable, not in body alone, but in spirit. The storm carried their shouts and struggle into the canyon, but gradually the rain softened, the wind calmed, and the riders who remained turned back. They fled into the distance, leaving only the echoes of their defeat. Rain pulled Eve into his arms, drenched and trembling, Not from the cold, but from the intensity of everything that had just happened. "You did it," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "You stood your ground." Eve let out a shaky laugh, the first real laugh in years. "We did it," she corrected, wrapping her arms around him. The canyon seemed to breathe with them, the storm's fury giving way to a calm they both could feel deep in their bones. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the wet canyon, Eve realized something she hadn't dared to believe. The past was behind her, and for the first time, the future looked like something worth fighting for. The first light of dawn broke gently over the canyon, painting the jagged cliffs in warm hues of gold and rose. Eve awoke to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant song of birds, a sound she hadn't heard in years without fear pressing at her chest. For the first time in a long time, the world felt safe, welcoming even, as if it had been waiting for her to finally open her eyes. Rain was already awake, sitting on a rock nearby, polishing his sword with a careful, almost meditative rhythm. His presence was steady, grounding, like the earth itself. When he noticed her stirring, a small smile crept across his face, the kind of smile that could make the heaviest sorrow feel lighter. "Morning," he said simply, his voice gentle but warm. "Morning," Eve replied, brushing the damp hair from her face. Her body ached from the fight, but the pain was almost comforting, a reminder that she was alive, that she had survived. They shared a quiet breakfast by the stream, the water sparkling in the sunlight, and for a while, they simply watched the world awaken. The sound of the flowing water, the chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves. All of it felt like a melody written just for them. A song that celebrated survival, resilience, and hope. Eve thought about everything that had brought her here, the fear, the captivity, the loneliness. And yet, standing beside Rain, she realized that every moment had led her to this one. The dawn of a life she had always dreamed of, but never dared to claim. "We can't stay here forever," she said finally, her voice tinged with both determination and wistfulness. "There's a whole world waiting, and I want to see it. With you." Rain's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand. "Then we'll go. Together. We'll make a life of our choosing, not one that others decide for us." Eve felt her heart swell. The thought of freedom, of choosing her own path, was intoxicating. And yet, the most precious part of this new life wasn't just freedom. It was the promise of love, trust, and companionship. She had walked through fire, faced storms both literal and figurative, and now she had someone to walk beside her. They packed their modest belongings and set out on the trail that led away from the canyon, leaving behind the echoes of fear and pain. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if the weight of her past had been lifted with every mile. As the morning sun climbed higher, warming their backs and illuminating the path ahead, Eve looked at Rain and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known existed. It wasn't just the absence of danger. It was the presence of hope, the kind that made the heart feel full, expansive, and ready to embrace everything life had to offer. For the first time in years, Eve allowed herself to believe that happiness wasn't just a fleeting moment. It could be her reality. And walking beside Rain, hand in hand, she realized that together they could face anything the world had in store, with courage, love, and unwavering hope. The road stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of dirt winding through emerald valleys and golden fields. Eve and Rain walked side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, sharing silent reassurance. Every mile carried them farther from the shadows of their past. Yet Eve couldn't shake the lingering whispers of doubt that occasionally clouded her heart. Could this happiness last? Could trust, once broken, truly be rebuilt? Their journey led them to a small village nestled between rolling hills. It was quaint, with cobblestone streets and the scent of fresh bread drifting from the bakeries. Children laughed and ran freely, and the air carried a sense of warmth and simplicity Eve had only dreamed of. For the first time in years, she felt the pull of belonging. But peace, as always, came with its tests. The villagers welcomed them, but not without caution. Strangers brought curiosity and suspicion. A merchant eyed Rain warily, whispering under his breath about men who carried swords, women who traveled with secrets. Eve noticed the wary glances, the unspoken questions, and her chest tightened with anxiety. "We'll earn their trust," Rain said softly, sensing her unease. Not with words alone, but with actions. The next days tested them in unexpected ways. A storm rolled through, tearing roofs and flooding streets. The villagers struggled to repair the damage, and Rain didn't hesitate to lend his strength. Eve followed, distributing supplies and comforting frightened children. Each act, no matter how small, slowly wove them into the fabric of the community. But it wasn't just the storm that tested their resolve. One evening, a group of bandits tried to extort the village, threatening the people who had begun to embrace them. Fear surged in Eve's chest, memories of captivity clawing at her mind, but Rain's presence grounded her. "We face them together," he said, gripping her hand. "Whatever comes, we protect each other." The confrontation was tense. Rain's sword moved with precision, not a moment wasted, and Eve discovered a strength within herself she had never known. She wasn't the same frightened girl who had once felt powerless. She was fierce, capable, and unwavering. Together, they defended the village, and when the danger finally passed, the villagers' eyes were filled with gratitude, respect, and awe. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, Eve and Rain sat together, exhausted but triumphant. The trust they had begun to rebuild, not just with the villagers but within themselves, felt solid, unbreakable. "I used to think happiness was a fleeting thing," Eve whispered, her head resting on Rain's shoulder. "But tonight, I understand. It's forged through trials, strengthened by trust, and shared with someone who never lets go." Rain kissed her forehead gently. "And we've only just begun, Eve. The world is vast and our story is far from over. But as long as we face it together, nothing can break us." Eve closed her eyes, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. In the face of storms, both literal and emotional, they had discovered the truth. Love and trust could grow stronger through adversity. And with that realization, her heart opened fully to the possibility of a future brighter than any she had dared to imagine. The morning sun spilled gold over the village, painting the rooftops in warm light. Eve woke to the smell of fresh bread and the distant laughter of children, a sound that seemed almost unreal to her ears. It had been weeks since the storm and the bandits, and in that time, she had begun to feel rooted in a way she had never known. The village had become a sanctuary, not just for her and Rain, but for the quiet parts of her heart that had been wounded long ago. Yet peace has a way of stirring hidden yearnings. As Eve helped the villagers with their daily tasks, she found herself listening to the soft, almost imperceptible rhythm of life around her. The songs of the birds, the murmur of water in the brook, the laughter echoing from the schoolhouse. It was in these small, delicate moments that her heart whispered truths she had long ignored. Rain noticed it too. One afternoon, while they were repairing a fence on the outskirts of the village, he stopped and looked at her with a gentle intensity. "Eve," he said softly, "you've changed. I see it in the way you move, the way your eyes linger on things. There's a spark I didn't see before." Eve's cheeks warmed, but she looked away, uncertain. "I don't know if it's me or just the village," she admitted. "I feel alive somehow, but part of me is still afraid. Afraid that this happiness could vanish as quickly as it came." Rain reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Happiness isn't something that just comes and goes," he said. "It's something we nurture, something we protect. Together we can face whatever comes and let this life grow around us." The words settled in her chest like a comforting ember. She realized that her fear wasn't of losing the village or the life they were building. It was of losing Rain. Losing him meant losing the very heartbeat of her newfound courage. Days passed, each one filled with laughter, shared work, and quiet moments beneath the trees. Eve discovered a joy in small things, helping an elderly woman mend a dress, watching a young boy learn to ride a horse, laughing until her sides ached with Rain over a silly mistake in the kitchen. These were the moments that stitched her heart together. One fragile thread at a time, one evening, As the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows over the fields, Eve found herself walking alone along the brook. She felt the wind whispering through the trees, carrying with it a sense of possibility. Her heart swelled with a quiet understanding. Happiness wasn't just a fleeting feeling. It was the courage to open one's heart fully, to trust, and to embrace life, despite its uncertainties. When she returned to the village square, she found Rain waiting for her, a soft smile on his face. No words were needed. In the way their hands met and held, in the gentle brush of their shoulders, they both understood. Their hearts had whispered to each other long before, and now, those whispers had become a promise. Eve realized then that love wasn't just about passion or desire. It was about trust, about presence, about choosing each other again and again. And in that choice, she felt a happiness so profound it made her eyes water. A happiness that would carry them through whatever the world dared to send next. The village had settled into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Dawn brought the crow of roosters and the smell of fresh bread. Evening brought the soft glow of lanterns and the murmured stories of neighbors. Eve cherished these simple rhythms, the way the village seemed to breathe alongside her own heart. But as much as peace had embraced her, life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. It began subtly, with rumors carried on the wind. Travelers spoke of bandits gathering in the northern woods, of crops failing in nearby villages, of a harsh winter that threatened to take hold sooner than expected. The villagers, who had known hardship before, began to whisper with worry. Eve noticed Rain's quiet tension, the way his hands lingered on the tools as if he were bracing for something beyond repair. One evening, as they worked to reinforce the barn, a rider came galloping into the village. Dust streaked his face and his eyes held urgency. He dismounted with trembling hands, his words cutting through the golden glow of sunset. "The northern pass. It's not safe. Bandits are moving fast. They may come here. You must prepare." Fear rippled through the villagers like a sudden gust. Eve felt her chest tighten, her pulse quicken, but she refused to let panic take hold. Rain stepped beside her, his presence steadying. "We've faced storms before," he said, voice calm but firm. "We'll face this one too, together." That night, the village gathered. Torches flickered, casting shadows on determined faces. Plans were made, barricades built, and watch shifts assigned. Eve found herself standing with Rain under the starlit sky, their hands intertwined, drawing strength from one another. "Do you think we can protect everyone?" Eve whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Rain squeezed her hand. "We have to. Fear doesn't protect anyone. Courage does. And I believe in us in this village. And in you." The first night of the bandits' approach came with a storm. Rain lashed against rooftops and thunder rolled over the hills like an angry drum. Eve huddled under the eaves of her small cottage, watching the dark silhouettes moving through the wind. Her heart raced, but she remembered Rain's words. "Courage," she told herself. "Protecting those you love, that is courage." When the bandits arrived at dawn, the villagers were ready. They fought not just with tools and makeshift weapons, but with the fierce determination of a community that refused to be broken. Eve found herself in the thick of it, guiding the villagers, comforting the frightened, and sharing every ounce of strength she had. By the time the storm passed and the bandits were driven away, the village was battered but unbroken. Eve's clothes were soaked, her hands scraped, yet a triumphant smile lit her face. Rain pulled her close, their laughter mingling with the soft drizzle that had turned to light rain. "You were amazing," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "We were amazing. All of us," Eve nodded, tears mixing with the rain. For the first time she understood the depth of love, courage, and community, not just as words, but as lived truth. The storm had tested them, but it had also shown them the strength of their hearts when joined together. The morning after the storm felt almost magical. The rain had softened the earth, leaving a fresh, clean scent that mingled with the faint aroma of charred wood from the barricades the villagers had built. Birds, as if sensing the victory, sang timidly from the trees, and the first rays of sunlight pierced the clouds, scattering gold across the village. Eve breathed deeply, letting the serenity wash over her. The village had survived, but the battle had left its mark. The barn's roof needed repair, a few homes had broken windows, and the fields had been trampled in the chaos. Yet what remained was far stronger than the damage, a shared sense of resilience and unity. Villagers moved with purpose, helping one another, and laughter slowly returned amidst the work. Eve found herself drawn to the small moments, the children laughing as they helped carry water, neighbors sharing warm bread, and Rain's calm presence guiding the restoration. As she worked to repair the barn's roof with Rain, she noticed a small, neatly wrapped bundle resting against the wooden beams. Curiosity sparked. Eve picked it up, careful not to disturb the ribbon. Inside, she found a simple, hand-carved lantern, its glass panels etched with delicate patterns of stars and vines. Alongside it, a note read, "For the light you bring to our lives, may this always remind you that even the darkest nights can be brightened by courage and love." Eve's chest tightened. The gift was anonymous, yet the warmth it carried felt personal, like an embrace from someone who knew her heart intimately. She turned to Rain, who was watching her quietly, his eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Rain." "Look at this," she whispered, holding up the lantern. He smiled softly, stepping closer. "It's beautiful. Whoever gave it, they understood you." Eve felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She could hardly describe the mix of emotions swirling inside her, gratitude, surprise, and a profound sense of connection. That moment, fragile yet powerful, reminded her that even after storms, light could emerge from the shadows. Later, as evening descended and the villagers gathered around a communal fire, Eve lit the lantern. Its glow was gentle, yet it illuminated the faces of everyone who had fought, feared, and persevered. The warmth of the fire mingled with the lantern's light, casting a golden aura over the village square. Laughter, songs, and shared stories filled the air, and Eve realized that this simple light symbolized more than just a gift. It symbolized hope, love, and the strength of a community that refused to break. Rain stepped beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "See," he murmured, "even in the darkest times, light finds its way." Eve leaned into him, letting the flickering glow reflect in her eyes. She thought of the trials they had faced, the fears they had conquered, and the love that had grown amidst chaos. And for the first time in a long while, she felt certain that no matter what storms lay ahead, together, they could illuminate the world around them. As the night deepened, the village hummed with life, and the lantern's soft glow shone like a beacon of hope, a reminder that love, courage, and unity could create light even in the most uncertain times. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, painting golden patterns on the village paths. Eve woke to the gentle hum of life returning to the village, the soft clatter of tools, the chatter of neighbors, and the distant laughter of children racing through puddles left behind by the recent storm. It was a rare moment of peace, one that felt almost sacred after the chaos they had endured. Rain was already awake, sitting near the river that ran along the edge of the village, skipping stones across its calm surface. Eve quietly joined him, her presence soft but comforting. Neither spoke at first. Words seemed almost unnecessary in the quiet intimacy of shared survival. The river reflected the clear sky, and with every ripple, Eve felt a sense of clarity she hadn't known she needed. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you ever think about what brought us here? Not just to this village, but to each other?" Her voice was low, almost hesitant, as if asking the question aloud might make the answer fragile. Rain paused, tossing another stone into the water. "All the time," he admitted. "I used to think life was a series of random events, but now, it feels like every choice, every stumble led me to this moment." Eve's heart skipped. There was a weight to his words, an unspoken truth she had longed to hear. She looked at him, searching his eyes for the courage she hoped he felt as well. "I don't just mean the village," she whispered, her fingers tracing the edge of the riverbank. "I mean us. You've been my anchor, Rain. Through every fear, every uncertainty, you've been there." Her voice caught, overwhelmed by the emotion she had kept inside for so long. Rain reached out, taking her hand in his, grounding her with a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to finish." he said softly, though his eyes shone with understanding. I know. Eve's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of the kind of joy that surprises and overwhelms the heart. The weight of unspoken feelings lifted, replaced by the warmth of shared vulnerability. Rain drew her closer, resting his forehead against hers. I've felt it too, he confessed. For a long time. I was just waiting for the right moment, or maybe for you to feel it too. Eve smiled through her tears, laughter mingling with relief. The world felt simultaneously vast and intimate, as though the universe itself had paused to witness this moment of truth. In that quiet morning, beside the flowing river and surrounded by the lingering echoes of a village reborn, two hearts finally spoke the language they had long known but never dared to voice. They stayed there for hours, talking, laughing, sharing dreams, and sometimes sitting in silence, letting the connection between them grow stronger with each heartbeat. Eve realized that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about presence, trust, and the courage to let someone see the deepest parts of you. As the day faded into a soft twilight, Eve felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for survival, but for love that had blossomed amid hardship. And for the first time she believed with certainty that the future, no matter what it held, would be brighter because they would face it together. The village had transformed. Where once there were scars of hardship, there was now laughter, music, and the vibrant pulse of life. Eve and Rain walked hand in hand through the familiar streets, their steps light, hearts unburdened yet carrying the quiet strength of everything they had endured. Every corner, every tree, seemed to whisper the story of resilience, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. The market square was alive with activity. Children chased each other around stalls, their laughter echoing like bells. Vendors called out cheerfully, offering fresh fruits, fragrant spices, and hand-woven crafts. It was a symphony of life, one that made Eve's chest swell with gratitude. She paused for a moment, letting the energy of the village wash over her. Here, amidst these people, she felt the culmination of a journey she hadn't even known she could complete. Rain squeezed her hand, pulling her gently toward the center of the square where a small stage had been set up. Villagers had gathered, and the air was thick with excitement. They had planned a celebration, a festival of new beginnings, marking not only the village's recovery, but the bonds that had held them together through adversity. Eve's eyes glistened as she saw familiar faces smiling. Faces that had once been etched with worry, now radiant with joy. The elders spoke of courage, the children performed dances, and musicians played tunes that seemed to capture the heartbeat of the village itself. Every note, every laugh, every clap felt like a stitch sewing together the fabric of their shared lives. Then, as the sun dipped low, casting golden hues across the square, Rain turned to Eve. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring, polished to catch the fading sunlight. Eve, he began, voice steady but filled with emotion. We've walked through storms, faced shadows, and yet here we are, stronger, together, and ready for everything the future holds. Will you continue this journey with me forever? Tears welled up in Eve's eyes, a mixture of disbelief, joy, and profound love. She could feel the weight of the past, the struggles, the fear, dissolve in that single moment. Smiling through her tears, she nodded. Yes, Rain, always. A cheer erupted from the crowd, enveloping them in warmth and celebration. The village erupted with music, laughter, and dancing. Eve and Rain joined the celebration, their hearts lighter than they had ever known. Every touch, every glance spoke of a love forged through trials and strengthened by shared dreams. As night fell and lanterns dotted the sky like stars come to rest, Eve looked around at the faces of friends and neighbors, at the village that had endured, at the love she and Rain had discovered. A profound sense of peace settled over her. Life was imperfect, but it was beautiful. And most importantly, it was theirs. Holding Rain close, Eve whispered, "We made it." "We really did, and we'll keep making it," he replied, his voice soft yet certain. Under a sky full of glowing lanterns and endless possibilities, they danced together, hearts entwined, knowing that no matter what storms might come, they had each other and the courage to embrace every new dawn. The story ended, not with the closing of a chapter, but with the radiant beginning of everything yet to come.